1 year, that is all the time the NFL needed. 1 year after a black quarterback named Marlin Briscoe walked onto an NFL field and silenced every single person who said it was impossible. 1 year after he threw for 1,000 yards and 14 touchdowns and made the whole football world run out of excuses. The NFL found another black quarterback, and what they did to him was worse. So much worse that even today, 50 years later, the people inside that league will not say his name in public, will not acknowledge what happened, will not sit in front of a camera and explain how the most talented black quarterback of his generation was handed a career deliberately designed to fail. James Harris could throw. James Harris could read a defense. James Harris could lead. Every coach who stood on a sideline next to him knew it. Every single one of them. And that exact knowledge is precisely why they buried him, because a second black quarterback succeeding after Marlin Briscoe was not a coincidence. The NFL was willing to allow. It was a threat, and the NFL eliminated it before America ever got the chance to notice. Grambling State University, 1969. If you do not know that name, that is exactly the point. Grambling State is not Notre Dame. It is not Alabama. It is not one of those powerhouses whose players get flown to combine events on private jets while scouts fight over who gets to shake their hand first. Grambling State is a historically black university tucked into a small Louisiana town that most NFL scouts would not have found on a map if their jobs depended on it. But James Harris was there. And word travels, even when powerful people wish it would not, because what James Harris was doing on that football field in Louisiana was so far beyond anything happening at the schools those scouts were actually paid to watch that ignoring him was becoming genuinely embarrassing. His arm was not just strong, it was surgical. The kind of arm that makes defensive coordinators close their eyes during film sessions because watching the ball arrive exactly where it was supposed to arrive every single time is physically uncomfortable when you know your job is to stop it. His football mind was something else entirely. Coaches who worked with him at Grambling talked about him the way people talk about a phenomenon they cannot fully explain. He saw the field differently. He processed information faster. He made decisions in real time that most quarterbacks cannot make after watching film for a week. James Harris was, by every football measurement that actually matters, exactly what every NFL franchise claimed to be searching for. So Buffalo drafted him in 1969, and the moment he walked into that building, everything changed. Not on the field, not in practice, not in the film room where his preparation and his football intelligence were impossible to question or dismiss or explain away. It changed in the conversations that happened behind closed doors. The quiet ones. The ones with no minutes taken and no recordings made and no paper trail that could ever be pulled out 20 years later as evidence of what was really being decided. Can we start him? That was the question. That was always the question. Not, is he good enough? Not, does he give us the best chance to win? Those questions had already been answered by anyone who had spent 30 minutes watching James Harris prepare for a game. The question was simpler, uglier, more honest than any NFL front office would ever be publicly. What will people say if we start a black quarterback? And in 1969, in the same country that was still processing the Civil Rights Act, that question carried a weight that had nothing to do with football. Harris felt that weight from day one. But here is what nobody in that building expected. He did not break under it. He did not shrink, did not complain, did not give them the excuse they were waiting for. He just kept getting better, and that refusal to disappear quietly made everything that came next so much worse. Asterisk. Let me tell you something about Buffalo in 1969. This was not a franchise searching for answers. This was not a rebuilding team desperate enough to try anything. The Buffalo Bills had options. They had resources. They had coaches who had been in this league long enough to recognize talent when it was standing directly in front of them. And every single one of those coaches recognized James Harris, but Recognition and opportunity are two completely different things in the NFL. Especially when you are black. James Harris spent his first 2 seasons in Buffalo doing something that should have been impossible, performing well enough in every single situation to demand a starting position, while simultaneously watching that starting position get handed to men whose numbers did not come close to his. Not close. Not even in the same conversation. Quarterbacks who threw more interceptions. Quarterbacks who read defenses slower. Quarterbacks who stood in that huddle and commanded exactly zero of the natural authority that every single person on that roster felt the moment James Harris opened his mouth, and the coaches watched all of this, said nothing, kept writing other names on that depth chart while James Harris showed up every single morning and outworked everybody in that building and went home every single night knowing exactly why his name was not moving up that board. It had nothing to do with football. It never had anything to do with football, but here is where the story takes a turn that nobody in the NFL wanted to happen. 1974 Los Angeles Rams. James Harris gets traded. New city, new coaches, new front office that looked at his tape with fresh eyes and saw something that Buffalo had spent 5 years pretending was not there. As starting quarterback, the Rams started him, and what happened next? What James Harris did the moment somebody finally handed him the opportunity that had been deliberately kept from him for half a decade should have ended every single argument about whether a black man could lead an NFL franchise. He won, not barely, not controversially, not in a way that gave his critics room to breathe. He won convincingly, repeatedly, against defenses that had spent their entire week preparing specifically to stop him, against coordinators who had every resource available to find his weakness. They never found it because it did not exist. James Harris led the Los Angeles Rams to the playoffs, threw the ball with a precision that made the coaches who had spent years ignoring him look exactly like what they were, men who had made decisions based on something other than football. The fan mail started arriving by the thousands. Black communities across America who had watched Marlin Briscoe get pushed out, who had spent years being told the position was not meant for men who looked like them, were suddenly watching James Harris every Sunday. And feeling something dangerous. Hope. Hope is the most dangerous thing a black man can give America. Not anger, not protest, not resistance. Hope. Because hope means people start believing things can change. Hope means communities start expecting things that the people in power have no intention of delivering. Hope means a generation of young black quarterbacks starts looking at James Harris on that Los Angeles Rams field and thinking, if he can do it, so can I. And the NFL could not allow that. So they watched, waited, looked for their moment. It came in 1976. James Harris had just led the Rams to one of their best seasons in franchise history. He was not just playing well, he was playing at a level that was making the people who had spent years questioning whether a black quarterback could lead an NFL team look publicly, visibly, uncomfortably foolish. And then the whispers started, not from fans, not from players, not from anyone who had actually stood on a sideline and watched James Harris operate. From ownership. The quiet conversations that happen in rooms where nobody takes notes. The phone calls between powerful men who have known each other for decades and speak in a language specifically designed to say everything without ever saying anything that could be repeated in public. He is not the right fit. That was the phrase. That was always the phrase. Not, he cannot play. Not, his numbers are bad. Not, the players do not respect him. Just not the right fit. 4 words. Completely meaningless on their face. Completely devastating in practice. Because in the NFL, when an owner decides you are not the right fit, no coach can save you. No performance can protect you. No amount of wins or completions or playoff appearances can override a decision that was never about football in the first place. Pat Hayden got the starting job, a white quarterback, less experienced, statistically inferior in almost every measurable category that actually determines quarterback performance, Pat Hayden started. James Harris watched, and the football world. The media, the analysts, the commentators who had spent 2 years watching James Harris prove every doubter wrong went completely, shamefully, deafeningly silent. Not one of them said what needed to be said. One broadcaster sat in front of a camera and told the truth that every person watching already knew in their gut. This was not a football decision. This was a message sent from NFL ownership to every black quarterback who was watching, to every young player in a historically black university somewhere who had been inspired by James Harris and Marlin Briscoe and had started to believe that the door was finally opening. The message was simple. 3 words. It is not. And James Harris, the man who had fought for 7 years to prove that a black quarterback deserved to stand in an NFL pocket, sat on that bench in Los Angeles and felt something shift inside him. Not defeat. Clarity. There is a specific kind of pain that athletes never talk about publicly. Not the physical pain. Not the torn ligaments and broken bones and bodies pushed past every limit science says is survivable. That pain has a language. That pain has a treatment plan and a timeline and a team of professionals dedicated to making it stop. The pain I'm talking about has none of that. It is the pain of knowing with absolute certainty that you are good enough. And watching the world pretend otherwise. James Harris carried that pain every single day from 1976 forward. Sitting on that Rams bench with a mind full of plays he would never get to run, an arm full of throws he would never get to make, a football intelligence that coaches privately acknowledged was extraordinary while publicly giving his snaps to someone else. But here is what the NFL did not account for. James Harris refused to become what they needed him to become. They needed him bitter. They needed him difficult. They needed him to give them something, anything, that could be pointed to as a character problem, as evidence that their decision had nothing to do with race and everything to do with professionalism. He never gave them that moment. Not once. He showed up, prepared, supported his teammates with a grace that made every coach in that building privately uncomfortable because it removed every excuse they had constructed so carefully. And then came 1977. San Diego Chargers. One more chance. One more city. One more front office that looked at his tape and saw what Buffalo and Los Angeles had spent years pretending was not there. James Harris started again and again the moment he stepped onto that field. Something happened in those stands that the NFL had been quietly dreading since 1969. Black communities across San Diego showed up. Not just as football fans, as witnesses, as people who understood that what was happening on that field was bigger than a game, that every completion James Harris threw was a direct argument against every lie the league had been telling for 50 years. The stadium felt different when James Harris played. Coaches felt it. Players felt it. The vendors in the concession stands felt it. It felt like history refusing to be silent, but the NFL had learned something from Los Angeles. They had learned that waiting for a performance reason to remove a black quarterback was taking too long, was becoming too obvious, was generating exactly the kind of attention they could not afford. So they stopped waiting for reasons. San Diego moved on after one season. No explanation, no press conference, no acknowledgement that a man who had spent nearly a decade fighting for the right to simply play the position he was born to play deserved at least the basic dignity of an honest conversation. Just moved on. And James Harris, 30 years old, finally understood something that should have never taken that long to learn. This league was never going to change on its own. I need you to sit with something for a moment. James Harris played in the NFL from 1969 to 1979. 10 years. A full decade of showing up in buildings that did not want him there, of preparing harder than anyone else in the room, of performing well enough, consistently enough, to make every argument against him collapse under the weight of its own dishonesty. 10 years, and in those 10 years across Buffalo, Los Angeles, and San Diego, James Harris threw for over 5,000 yards, leading 2 different franchises to playoff appearances, posted numbers that in any other era attached to any other face would have generated Pro Bowl selections and endorsement deals and the kind of media coverage that builds legacies. Instead, he got silence, the same silence that followed Marlin Briscoe. The same silence that would later follow Warren Moon through a draft room that refused to call his name. The same silence that this league has used as a weapon against black quarterbacks for so long that most people have stopped noticing it is even happening. But here is what that silence could never touch. What James Harris did, what he proved, what he forced this league to confront, whether it wanted to or not, laid the foundation for every single black quarterback who came after him. Doug Williams, winning the Super Bowl in 1987, that is James Harris. Warren Moon's Hall of Fame career, that is James Harris. Randall Cunningham changing what people believed a quarterback could look like, that is James Harris. Donovan McNabb, Michael Vick, Cam Newton, Lamar Jackson, the reigning MVP standing on that field today, making the entire football world run out of adjectives. That is James Harris. Every single one of those men stood on a foundation that James Harris helped build while nobody was watching, while the cameras were pointed elsewhere, while the NFL was doing everything in its institutional power to make sure his name never traveled further than the city he was currently playing in. They almost succeeded, because here is the thing about erasure that the people who practice it never fully understand. You can remove a name from a highlight reel. You can leave a player off a list. You can build a Hall of Fame and fill it with men who were never his equal and call it a complete picture of history. But you cannot erase what actually happened. You cannot change the scoreboard. You cannot unthrow the passes. You cannot take back the moments when 70,000 people inside a stadium watched James Harris operate and felt in their bones that they were watching something the league was not ready for. History does not disappear because powerful people are uncomfortable with it. It just waits for someone to come along and say the name out loud. So before you leave this video, I need you to do one thing. Remember, James Harris. Not because of the statistics, not because of the playoff appearances, not because of what he achieved despite everything this league threw at him. Remember him because of what they tried to do to him, and because of the fact that they failed. If this story made you feel something, if even one moment in this video made you realize that the NFL you think you know is not the whole story, hit that subscribe button right now. Because every single week we come back here and we pull another name out of the silence this league has spent 50 years carefully constructing. James Harris deserved better. Marlin Briscoe deserved better. Warren Moon deserved better. And every black quarterback who picked up a football in America and dared to believe the position belonged to them deserves so much better than what this league gave them. We are just getting started. Subscribe and make sure they never get erased again.